Very good afternoon, and a warm welcome from my side to all uh, distinguished speakers and to all attendees. And special thanks for Mr. Petkar, who have very kindly accommodated our invitation to participate in this tech summit. Uh, and he has traveled all the way from Mumbai. So really, we are very thankful to you, Mr. Petkar. And ladies and gentlemen, you would also agree with me that this is really an exclusive session. Not only exclusive, perhaps a rare for many of us. So please, keep your questions ready, which I'll come to you towards the end of this session. But straight away, Mr. Petkar, on this Sunday, I met a friend of mine, and he's a owner of a B segment hatchback, used it for about over a decade, and contemplating a change. And he's really confused. The confusion is not about which model to go for, but whether to buy an ICE vehicle or go for electric. Because not only him, some of his peers are also kind of sitting on the fence, thinking whether it would be appropriate to invest in an ICE vehicle now, considering that they have slightly longer ownership periods. So, taking that as a cue, I would like to ask you: is the ICE vehicle almost nearing the end of its life?
So thank you, Sumantra, for having me here. First of all, at the outset, I would like to compliment ETAuto for holding this summit 2022. I think it's happening at a much opportune moment. Coming to your the first part of the question about your friend, confused. I must say, indeed, today the consumer is spoilt with the choice, and he has the option right from, let's say, the diesel, gasoline, CNG, and also the electric vehicles. And frankly speaking, I mean, what advice I can give it to him? Finally, it becomes the individual choice when you have so much of an options to choose from. And but that what we have seen from Tata Motors side, I mean, if you look at even the newest product, the newest technologies, like the electric vehicles, there has been such a strong demand, and there has been such a strong waiting period, and people are willing to wait. So you have a consumer class which is willing to place their bets on something as new as, let's say, the electric vehicles. And of course, there are the consumer class which would like to go for the conventional diesel, petrol, liquid fuels, and also in between, thanks to the focus from the government in terms of alternate fuel, even there's a consumer class, and I do believe now we have crossed a kind of a tipping point where the people are now shifting even to the CNG vehicles. So the consumer is spoiled with the choice. It's an individual choice finally. The second part of your question, which is about, is it an end of the IC engines? And I must say in all humility that this is not the first time this question is being asked. I have witnessed many of the conferences which are dedicated to this topic, whether the IC engines are dead. So if you go back, ever since with the advent of these IC engines, which is say late 18th century, and the subsequent development in the 19th century onwards, IC engines have certainly come a long way. And but in the early part of the 19th century, the electric vehicles were in the majority. So if you look at what happened in America, more than 40% of the market share was by the electric vehicles, upwards of, I would say, the 20-25% by the steam engines, and less than 20% were the IC engines. So that's something which has happened, and so in those times, the questions were asked that is it now that the IC engines are going to be dead? So coming to the point, yes, I mean the IC engines are surviving, and there are a number of reasons as we speak. The first and the foremost, if you look at the global projections which are there, 2030, if you take that as a sort of a important milestone, we still see the penetration of the electric vehicles or the zero emission technologies, by and large, give and take few percentages here and there, maybe to the tune of say 30%, which means the balance 70% demand has to be fulfilled by the IC engines. Secondly, if you look at the focus from the government of India in terms of transition to the alternate fuel vehicles, we are aware that today, as we speak, there are more than 2,000 CNG stations across the country. But the kind of the investment commitment which is there from the government and number of clusters which are getting open, the CNG infrastructure is expected to grow to 10,000 CNG stations by 2030. Thirdly, if we look at what's happening in the recent past, and especially driven by the fact that there is a heavy dependence of the country on the imported crude, so there has been a shift happening towards the usage of the biofuels. You take the case of say ethanol, you take the case of methanol now, which is being talked about, the biodiesels, the bio CNGs. So the penetration of the biofuels is also happening, and that presents an interesting opportunity. And therefore, then you need to continuously work towards the development of the IC engines. And the new topics which are coming, which are quite relevant nowadays in the context of the IC engine, and this question what you pose is also about the two emergent technologies, which actually puts the spotlight back on the IC engines. One is about the usage of the hydrogen, that means burn the hydrogen inside the IC engines, what we call them as the H2Is. And secondly, the emergence of the e-fuels or the synthetic fuels. Now, these are the two jokers in the pack which are there, and I can say that between both of them, they present an interesting opportunity. So, whether the final word is said, I think we are still maybe few years away, but we at the same time cannot be ignorant of the fact that there is a global shift which is happening towards the zero emission technologies, and this driven more from the sustainability and the carbon neutrality point of view. So therefore, it's not to say that the IC engines will stay in eternity. There has to be the end one day, but that one day is always evading to us.
So is it a moving goalpost?
So it's a moving goalpost, but I can now say with if you look at across the globe what's happening and the commitments which are being given by the various governments, people are talking about achieving the net zero anywhere from say 2050 to 2070. So Europe, America 2050, China 2060, India 2070, and many of the the corporates would like to even take a much stringent target and try to achieve it even before. If that be the case, in which case, unless you have a zero emission technologies, and today we know that there are two, one which is a battery electric vehicle, and other one is the fuel cell, hydrogen fuel cell. So the end game is, yes, that's where we would be shifting. But in the process, if somebody is looking at the horizon of say 10 years, I think the picture is very clear that the IC engines will stay. Right. It's more to do with what individual choices that you would like to make, given the fact that you are spoiled with the choice today.
Indeed. In a nutshell, you're saying that it's in fact better for consumers now than ever before, given that they have more choices to pick from, and it will only get better as the infrastructure, distribution infrastructure, be it CNG and be it EV charging stations, improve. So therefore, from that perspective, definitely better times from the consumer. Maybe a little bit more complex and challenging at the OEM's end in terms of product planning and manufacturing and all whatnot. But in terms of, if you look at the overall objective of real, true carbon footprint, do you think, I mean, at the vehicle level, there's no question. A battery EV beats any other technology hands down. Okay, but in terms of let's say, if you look at, you mentioned about e-fuels or synthetic fuels, that's also net carbon zero, and with little or no modification to the existing powertrain, it can be used. So from that, if you look at it from under that lens, how would you see the technologies?
Yeah, so the e-fuels, if you look at the status today, They are at quite, I would say, the very, very early phase, sort of a pre-development phase. And,
Yeah,
the
just to add to that, no, do you think that no, the technologies like e-fuels or the likes will get opportunity enough for them to kind of try and reach a maturity stage, or will they meet a premature
Yeah,
death?
so that's the important part, because if today they are at a pre-development stage, when you complete the development, when you actually scale up, when you deploy, and it's not to say that the engines will not require any modification, because it all depends on what are going to be the fuel properties in terms of, let's say, the C10 number and other parameters. So it's not going to be easy. It will take time, and if that is the period in which you have the other technologies actually rapidly moving, and especially we know that the battery electric vehicles are moving very rapidly, supported by the government, supported by the individual OEMs and the ecosystem players. And same thing is poised to happen even for the hydrogen technologies. I think then maybe it would perhaps end up in becoming like a niche. Too early to say, but I can only say that in the pecking order it stands last.
Right, right. And that's the perhaps the challenge for people who are working in those technologies to kind of fast forward if there's a possibility. But at Tata Motors, what's the kind of technology mix that you are working on? Because I mean, you're one of the few OEMs who have, let's say, from a small hatch to a huge 4950 tonner commercial vehicles, and in between a whole range. So in terms of technology development, in terms of form factors, how do you see, what's the kind of roadmap that you're working?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a complex situation for us because there is a limited budget in which everything has to happen. But being the mindful of the fact that that you need to focus on the conventional technologies, and at the same time you also need to place your bets on the future technologies. We have been working across the board on all categories of the fuel mix options, and so we are there today. I mean, you name it, that we are there today. And even if you take the latest, let's say, the upcoming technologies like, say, hydrogen fuel cell, we are the first ones in the country to have showcase the urban bus as a part of one of the auto expos many years back. And we are the only ones to have won the first commercial tender for the supply of the 15 numbers of the hydrogen fuel cell buses. So we have the entire range. We are working on all kinds of technologies, and but we are also equally mindful of the fact that the future is actually toward the electrification.
Right. Indeed, the future is electric. And in terms of while the industry progresses towards that, and government has to play a key role, is already playing one, and at least for the foreseeable future, it has to play the kind of pave the way for the electrification industry to really reach that critical scale so that it can walk, if not run, on its own. So, what are the factors do you think that need to be kept in mind, both from the policymakers' perspective as well as the industry perspective, to ensure that there is sustainability in the in this whole EV ecosystem, which is still maturing, and more or less there is no one holds a kind of an equivalent of a PhD degree. Everyone is in a learning phase, be it a local domestic manufacturer or a global MNC, foreign MNC.
Yeah, so in fact, we have done a lot of study on this, and we are at a stage we are actually supplying the highest number of the electric cars today. We hold the highest market share as far as the urban electric buses are concerned. We won latest the tender related to the CESL. I can tell you there are four important factors. One is that related to the product. That means you need to have the product. You need to have the product, not just one, but you need to have the options. You need to provide customers with number of models, number of options, a range of a technology in terms of performance range, in terms of connected vehicle features. So this is something which is related to the product, and of course not to miss out on the safety aspect of the product. And the products have come to a stage, because at least we have been there in this for the last 4 years. And so product actually, is a starting point. Number two is about the supply chain. And supply chain, when we started, it was all imported stuff when we talked about the high voltage components. But as we speak, a lot of the local development is happening. And the supply chain from that point of view becomes very important. And we have seen there are many companies, startups, the vendor base who are actually engaged. They have committed their investment for the supply of the electric vehicle components. Thirdly, it is to do with the government and the government policies. And I think government has been extremely supportive. Rather, they have taken the fantastic lead. I still remember in 2019 when there was a MOVE summit in Delhi under the aegis of ETAuto, and a lot of announcements were made. It started with FAME 1 long back, then FAME 2, now there is the Auto PLI, the domestic value add kind of a criteria, incentivization, various state governments are in the picture. So I think this is something which is very positive, and that actually is helping to sustain the electric vehicle market and the growth. And the last but not the least, I think it's about the consumer and the consumer mindset. And we have seen that more you speak, more people seem to be interested to buy the electric vehicles. So therefore, I think the combination of all these four factors, is something which is going to be, helping to sustain this EV story. And to me, I feel we have actually broken that virtuous cycle of demand versus supply. So we are at that cusp now.
Broken the virtuous cycle. And if I were to ask you a very simple and point question, what is the time frame that you expect for the EV segment of the overall PV industry to overtake, to outpace the, not only outpace in terms of growth, but but in terms of share, overall share, in terms of volume, be a majority in the PV segment?
Yeah, so if you look at, as I was saying in my first part of the question, is the projections are about 30% by 2030, right? So it may vary individual OEM to OEM. It may vary model to model. Maybe the subcompact vehicles and the, the vehicles around, say, 4 meter could be the candidates. But there is no such, the firm and the hardline thing, I mean, you can electrify the vehicles. I mean, if the buses can be electrified, everything else can be electrified, right? As far as the mobility is concerned, and especially the urban mobility is concerned. So I think it is, because it is dependent on so many factors, there is a 2030 as an important milestone where the government also seems to have committed to a number of things under the Panchamrut or the COP26. So driven by that, I think there is going to be a rapid transition. 30% is not small. I mean, if we are today in 2022, today we are around, say, 5%. To reach that 30%, and this is in a growing market where the numbers are anyway going to increase.
Yes.
You
So
take,
absolute numbers
yeah,
will
you take, not just the four-wheeler, but two-wheeler, three-wheelers, and the commercial vehicle. It's a growing market, and therefore, in the growing market, to get 30% is a phenomenal achievement. And I mean, that's the kind of a number that we are looking at. So when they will overtake, I think it's, I would say, the billion-dollar question, because there are many things which have to, they fall in line. But the case is anywhere, let's say 2025 onwards, I think there could be a more rapid transition if it is not already there today.
2025 is also the timeline when the government has mandated, talked about the E20.
Yeah.
E20 mix. So E20 and flex fuel, what the scope or role it can play towards contributing towards cleaner mobility and making the ICE vehicle cleaner than it is now?
Yeah, so ethanol is a story which has been going over for many years, but I think it has picked up a significant momentum now. And there was the announcement on the World Environment Day that as a country today we are already 10% that we have achieved the blend of ethanol in the gasoline. 20% 2023 is the starting point where the vehicles with the material compatibility are supposed to be delivered as a part of the BS6 phase 2. And 2025 across the board, the intention is to have the E20. Now, ethanol as a fuel is something which is helping in number of ways. Of course, one, as I said some time back, about as a good import substitution. It can be domestically manufactured, and there is a good capacity which is coming up, and also helps in terms of the emission reduction. It's not like very high reduction, but it's a good reduction, I would say, anywhere between, say, 3 to 5%, 6% in the carbon footprint. If you are able to reduce, why not? I mean, that's something which is a great achievement. So many facets to this, And coming to the point about the flex fuel engines, the vehicles will come because OEMs also have made a commitment that each one will be working and delivering the flex fuel vehicles. We also need to look at how the whole availability of the flex fuel, because it's not adequate to say in this city, in this location, you have the flex fuel, so you supply the vehicle, right? I mean, as an OEM, we also look at the broad-based
And you cannot control the movement of the vehicle once
Yeah,
the customer
correct.
purchases it.
So therefore, it's expensive technology also, complex technology, and like I said, there are so many fronts on which today the OEMs are working with. I mean, and given the limited budget that all of us have, and the many things which have to be done in terms of even the regulatory requirements. As we speak, 2022 we had the CAPE 22 deployment. 23 we will have the BS6 phase 2. Then E20 coming up, and then electric vehicle and the fuel cell and synthetic fuels and CNGs and other things. So of course we are all committed to the government's vision, and I think OEMs are working. Tata Motors is not an exception to that. So I think that's what I would like to say. It's not like that everywhere there will be flex fuel, but yes, in some niche pockets.
With all these developments, has it also resulted in a larger share in terms of budget for R&D at Tata Motors also, given you still have an overall the kind of expenditure that you have on an annual level? The R&D expenditure as a percentage, has it seen
Certainly. In fact,
what level it is in now?
I can tell you that I myself was thinking that in 2017 when this announcement came for leapfrogging from BS4 to BS6, so I thought that it would be all once for all done and dusted. Once we launch BS6 in 1st of April 2020, and there could be a period of silence, let's say, thereafter. But I think the way the things are coming one after other. Talked about this government strong focus on the electrification, and also the policy around the green hydrogen and all that actually is making us to create number of programs, and therefore the investment in R&D is continuously growing, and it will not stop, and both in terms of the infrastructure, in terms of the equipment, in terms of the let's say the digital tools, in terms of the people, the resources. I think everywhere currently the investments are being made. I would not like to give the number because this is something which is company confidential information, but suffice to say that yes, it's a highly, I would say, the investment intensive situation at the moment.
Highly intensive, investment intensive situation, especially when the industry also getting highly technology intensive, right? So that, I mean, I know we have run out of time, but I still want to give an opportunity for the audience to ask maybe 2 or 3 questions. Keep it brief, crisp.
Namaste, Petkar ji. Good afternoon. This is Saurabh Bohan Saxena, representing a startup called Advanced Hydrogen on Demand. Good to hear at least hydrogen 3-4 times into your session. Looking at thinking future and acting now on that policy, if we see there's so much of 320 million vehicles on the road, and we are talking of new vehicles coming in with all the regulations, and typically alternate fuel has been always alternate, and now we are moving to electricity. So my direct question is on hydrogen. How do you see that if we can work like direct burning? You said the new joker, or Shell calls it a poor cousin, it used to call for hydrogen. So how do you see that as an arrangement for the current vehicles in terms of usage of that and reducing the pollution level from the properties of hydrogen which is there? And my follow-on question is how long with these alternate fuels and all you see the IC engines in the timeline staying, say 2040 later or earlier itself?
Okay, so I think if I have understood your 2 questions, let me take the second one first. I think your question, the second one was about the alternate fuel, they will remain alternate, and how long they will go, in the future 2040. So let me address that question. First of all, I think now it is a misnomer to call the CNG as an alternate fuel, because we have broken that virtuous cycle, and demand for the CNG vehicle has been growing very rapidly. In fact, it is touching to the tune of say 40% in the entire that's driven by, the rising cost of diesel fuel, and the CNG is still cheaper. So in the overall total cost of ownership, CNG still makes sense, and therefore we see a very rapid growth as far as the CNG is concerned. To me, it is no more like to be called as an alternate, but I think it is now threatening to become like a mainstream fuel. Now, how long it will go on? I think it, as long as you will have the, the availability of the alternate fuel. Today, it's all imported, coming from the overseas countries, low domestic production. But when you go for a long-term contract, actually it's very cheaper. So therefore, it's up to the policymakers, how long they would like to get this kind of the CNG or the LNG converted to the CNG. The first part, which is related to the hydrogen. The hydrogen is something which is now a phenomena, which is in the making. Commitments are there, investments are there. The usage of the hydrogen for the existing vehicle fleet is something which is a long shot at this moment, because the first they will have to come for the new vehicles, right? I mean, you don't take a bet on doing something for the vehicles which are in the field unless you have internalized the technology, you have brought it on the OE vehicles, you have understood all the nuances, including the safety aspect, and then you look for whether there can be a, let's say, the deployment for the vehicles which are in the field. So I think that will be a long shot, is what I would say, if that was your question.
Okay, good afternoon, sir. My name is Pacharapon from LMC Automotive. I am from the Power and Forecast team based in Bangkok, Thailand. Regarding the BEV growth in India, it seems that it has already taken off. And within this, from the beginning of this year, there is a disrupt from Russian and Ukraine war. The fuel oil price rise, and particularly the CNG price almost double compared to the last year in India. Do you think that the BEV growth will overtake the CNG soon, at least 2025 or 2030?
Yeah, see, I mean, if it's a question which is a comparison between the BEV and the CNG, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, see, there are two aspects. One is the acquisition cost, other one is the ownership cost, right?
Yes.
As far as the ownership cost is concerned, still the battery electric vehicle would make sense, because the electricity is cheaper in this country, right? And of course, everything is regulated by the government, as I say. Secondly, in terms of the acquisition cost, I would say, because there is a large import today of the electric vehicle components, the acquisition cost is a challenge. However, there is a duty structure which is quite favorable for the battery electric vehicles in terms of the GST, which is not the benefit enjoyed by the CNG vehicle. How long that will continue, again, is a question mark, but we do believe that the government is quite supportive of this initiative. So net, it's not easy to say which one is better. It is a dynamic thing. It will keep moving, and one never knows, what happens in terms of once the capacity for the localization of the cell or the battery or the motor. When that gets actually developed in the country, you may find that the battery electric vehicles are going to be even more attractive, right? So, but as of now, we are seeing a demand for both. At least if I talk about Tata Motors, the battery electric vehicles, there is a strong demand, and the CNG vehicle, there is a strong demand. So I don't think customers are making a choice on the basis of, I mean, they purely go by what they, what are their parameters, what's in their consideration set, rather than we telling them this is good for you or that is good for you.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you for your question, and thank you very much, Mr. Petkar, for this lovely conversation. Always an interesting and insightful experience for me personally also, and I'm sure it's the same for all the audience here. And thank you for your questions, audience. So net is short answer to the question: is it the end of the ICE vehicle? The one word answer is no, but at the same time, with all the developments happening, perhaps now the goalpost has moved, and with the developments in the alternate fuel side and all the government policies, both on the biofuels as well as on the zero emission electrification side, there will be a concurrent development on both sides, and perhaps the the goal, the end of the road, perhaps the road has become slightly longer than it is now. It was maybe 2 or 3 years earlier for the ICE vehicle, and as the road for the EV is getting built, and it will continue, and perhaps at some point the ICE vehicle industry will have to kind of shift totally towards the electrified side, right?
Okay, I would just like to correct in between. I think you said everything correct, but whether the goalpost has shifted, I think it's too early to say. But what is extremely clear that the share of the IC vehicles is going to continuously decline, right? Now, what is that date? Is all, as I said, depending on the net zero ambitions of either the country or the individual OEMs.
Right. On that note, thank you very much, Mr. Petkar, and
Thank you.
back to my colleague. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, both of you.